The night I found out what my mother was really capable of, I was standing in my kitchen in scrub pants and a worn-out college t-shirt, halfway through reheating leftover pasta, not thinking about anything heavier than whether I'd remembered to set my alarm for the early shift. Then the knocking started. It wasn't a polite knock. It wasn't the kind you'd give a neighbor who might be asleep. It was frantic and desperate and wrong in a way that made me drop the fork on the counter before I'd even made a conscious decision to move. I crossed the apartment in about 5 steps and pressed my eye to the peephole. My sister was standing in the hallway. I hadn't seen her in 4 months. The last time was Thanksgiving, and even then it had been surface level, everyone pretending the tension in that dining room was just normal family static. She was standing hunched under the fluorescent light of my hallway, one hand on the grip of a wheelchair, the other arm wrapped around her own ribs like she was holding herself together by sheer pressure. Her bottom lip was split. There was a dark smear along her cheekbone that wasn't makeup. In the wheelchair, my niece sat with both hands gripping the armrests, a small backpack wedged behind her. She was 6 years old, and she wasn't crying. She was watching everything with huge, still eyes that had seen too much for a 6-year-old. I got the door open fast. My sister's knees buckled the second she saw my face, and I caught her before she went down, one arm around her back, the other hand reaching out to steady the wheelchair. She made a sound against my shoulder that wasn't quite a word. I maneuvered them both inside, pushed the door shut behind me, and eased her down onto the couch. My niece still hadn't said anything. She had a stuffed rabbit in her lap and she was holding it so tightly one of its ears was folded flat. Lily has cerebral palsy. She's verbal when she's comfortable, but when she's scared, she goes quiet in a way that always made my chest ache. I knelt in front of her. "Hey, sweetheart, you okay?" She gave me a small nod. Her eyes moved to her mother, then back to me. My sister's breathing was shallow and uneven. I'd worked in the emergency department long enough to recognize the way someone breathes when their ribs are compromised. I kept my voice even, the way I do at work when I need a patient to stay calm. "I'm going to look at you, okay? I need you to tell me where it hurts." She started to say something about not wanting to cause a scene, and I told her quietly that the time for worrying about scenes had passed. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I almost left it, but something made me glance at the screen. It was a text from my mother. "Whatever she told you, stay out of it. She made her choices." This is between her and Derek. I stared at those words for a moment. My mother, the woman who had a framed cross-stitch on her kitchen wall that said "family is everything," had just watched her daughter leave the house beaten and told me to look the other way. I turned the phone face down and went back to my sister. The bruising along her left side was bad. Possible cracked ribs, at minimum badly bruised. There was a cut above her eyebrow that had bled down into her hair and dried there. Her left wrist was swollen in a way that made me think fracture before sprain. "Who did this?" I asked, though I already knew. I'd always known, somewhere in the back of my mind, even when I'd pushed the thought away because it was easier. She said his name so quietly I almost missed it. Derek. And tonight. "What happened tonight?" She closed her eyes. Her voice came out in pieces. They'd argued about money again, about Lily's SSI check. The deposit had come in 3 days ago, and she'd asked him where it went, because the adaptive equipment supplier had called twice about an overdue balance. He'd told her it was handled. She pushed. He stopped using words. My hands were steady, because I'd trained them to be, but my jaw was tight enough to ache. I went to the bathroom and came back with the first aid kit I kept stocked out of professional habit. I worked on the cut above her eyebrow while she talked in that same fragmented way, like she was pulling each sentence up from somewhere deep. Lily watched me from her wheelchair. After a minute, she said, very softly, she tried to stop him. I looked at her. I know she did. He knocked over my chair. I kept my face neutral, but something cold settled in my chest and stayed there. I told my sister I was calling an ambulance. She started to argue, and I told her that wasn't a conversation we were having. I picked up my phone, ignored the second text from my mother that had come in while I was across the room, and dialed. The dispatcher was calm and efficient. I gave the address, described the injuries, confirmed there was no immediate threat in the apartment. When I hung up, my sister was looking at me with an expression. I recognized the specific exhaustion of someone who has been managing a situation alone for so long that having another person step in felt both like relief and like exposure. "He's going to say I provoked him," she said. "He can say whatever he wants," I told her. "I document injuries for a living." The paramedics arrived in under 10 minutes. I stayed close while they assessed her, answering their questions with clinical precision and making sure they noted everything: the pattern of the bruising, the wrist, the rib tenderness. I had my hospital ID on before they'd even knocked. One of the paramedics, a young guy who looked maybe 25, glanced at me when we were briefly in the hallway. "You work trauma?" "4 years," I said. "This is my sister." He nodded once, and his whole posture shifted. He understood what I was telling him. They loaded her onto the stretcher. I wheeled Lily alongside, her rabbit still in her lap. In the elevator, I crouched beside her chair. "You're going to ride with me, okay? We're going to follow the ambulance." She leaned forward and put both arms around my neck, stuffed rabbit and all, and pressed her face against my shoulder. I held her there for a moment, one hand on the back of her head. I had not cried yet. I was not going to cry yet. There was too much to do. The ER at Street Catherine's was the one I didn't work at, which was deliberate. I didn't want to call in favors. I just wanted my sister to be treated as a patient, not as someone's colleague's family member. The attending on duty was thorough. X-rays confirmed 2 cracked ribs and a hairline fracture in the wrist. The cut needed 4 stitches. The bruising told a story that was consistent with repeated blunt force, not a single incident. I sat with Lily in the waiting area while they stitched my sister up. I bought her a juice from the vending machine. She drank it slowly, watching a nature documentary on the TV mounted in the corner with the sound off. "Aunt Rachel," she said after a while. "Yeah? Is Derek going to find us here?" I looked at her. 6 years old. "No," I said. "And even if he did, I'd be standing between you and him." "Okay?" She thought about that. Then she held out half of a pack of crackers from her backpack. I took one because she was offering. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of instinct. "You need to stay out of my house." Derek's voice was flat, controlled in a way that was worse than shouting. "Callie called you and I get it, but this is between us. You take her to that hospital and blow this up. You're going to regret it." I glanced at Lily. She was watching the TV. I stood up and moved 2 steps away. "You put my sister in the emergency room," I said, keeping my voice very even. "You fractured her wrist and cracked 2 of her ribs. And you knocked over my niece's wheelchair. We're past the part where you get to ask me to mind my business." He said something else. I had already put the call on speaker and hit record on a second app I keep on my phone for exactly this kind of situation. Not because I planned this night. Because I work in emergency medicine, and I have seen enough to know that documentation is the only thing that reliably stands between a victim and a system that wants to move on. He told me I'd better think carefully about what I was starting. I let him finish. Then I said, "I already have," and ended the call. I saved the recording, airdropped it to my cloud backup, and sent a copy to my email. Then I went back and finished my cracker. When they moved my sister to a room, I brought Lily in and pulled a chair close to the bed. My sister's face was clean now, the cut neatly closed, her wrist in a temporary splint. She looked like herself again, which made her look more fragile, not less. I waited until Lily was absorbed in a cartoon on the room's tablet before I moved my chair closer. "I need to understand the money," I said quietly. She looked at the ceiling. "Lily's SSI comes in on the 3rd of every month. Direct deposit. The account is in Derek's name because when we set it up, I didn't have a steady address and he said it was easier. I never thought." She stopped. "How long has he been using it?" "I don't know exactly. 8 months? A year?" I started noticing the equipment bills weren't getting paid about a year ago. He always had an explanation. "And my mother?" Her jaw tightened. "She knows. She's known since February. I told her in the parking lot of her church. I showed her the bank statements on my phone, and she told me I was being ungrateful, that Derek provided for us and I was nitpicking." She paused. "She also told me not to make him angry." I thought about that cross-stitch in my mother's kitchen. Family is everything. "Is she on the account?" I asked. My sister's eyes came to mine. "She's the secondary account holder. Derek asked her to co-sign it last spring. Said it was so someone else could manage things if something happened to him." She watched my face. "I didn't know until 2 months ago. She didn't tell me." I sat back and let that land. My mother hadn't just looked away. She had been in the account. She'd had visibility into where that money was going every month for the past 8 months, and she had said nothing. She had gone to her church and baked her casseroles and sent me the occasional forward about gratitude, and she had let a man steal from her disabled grandchild. Okay, I said. I pulled out a notepad. I always have one. Occupational reflex. Tell me everything you remember. Dates, amounts, anything Derek said about it. Every incident. We're going to write it down. She stared at me. Rachel, he's going to try to get ahead of this. He's going to file something before we can, or he's going to claim you're unstable or unfit or whatever story works. The only thing that beats that is paper. I kept my voice level. I work in a hospital. I know what happens when people wait to document. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took the pen. We were still writing when Lily fell asleep in the chair beside the bed, rabbit tucked under her chin, feet dangling. My sister's handwriting got looser as the night wore on, and the pain medication kicked in, but she kept going. Dates, amounts. What he said. What my mother said. One incident after another, things she'd been carrying alone for a year, laying them down one by one onto the page. Around 4 a.m, I stepped into the hallway to call my colleague Priya, who works in the hospital's victim advocacy program. I trusted her completely, and I needed a second opinion on what I was looking at. She picked up on the third ring, groggy but not annoyed. I gave her the outline. By the end of it, she was fully awake. SSI misuses federal, she said. You know that. I know. And the mom is on the account. As a co-singer. Rachel. She paused. You have a recording of him threatening you? Time-stamped. Okay. You need a family law attorney before end of business tomorrow. I'm going to text you Janet Flores's number. She's handled cases like this. She's good, and she's not going to panic. Does she do SSI fraud referrals? She knows who does. I wrote the name down. Thank you. How's your sister? I looked through the small window in the door at my sister's face against the pillow, pale and still, and at Lily sleeping in the chair. She's going to be okay, I said. I'm making sure of it. Janet Flores met us at the hospital the next morning. She was a compact, precise woman in her early 50s who listened to everything without interrupting and took notes in a way that suggested she never wrote down anything she didn't intend to use. She reviewed the bank statements my sister had photographed on her phone, read through the written timeline we'd compiled, and listened to the threatening call. When she was done, she said, "He's already filed." My sister went white. Janet set a printout on the table. An emergency petition for temporary custody of Lily, filed at 8 a.m. that morning. Derek claimed my sister had abandoned the family home in a mentally unstable state, that she had a history of erratic behavior, and that her current living situation, a hospital room, demonstrated she was incapable of providing for a child with medical needs. He moves fast when he's scared, Janet said. She did not sound rattled. She sounded like someone who had expected this, which means we move faster. I'm filing a temporary protective order this afternoon, and I'm going to request an emergency hearing on the custody motion. We have 5 days, probably less. Can he win? My sister asked. Her voice was very small. Not with what Rachel has, Janet said. But we need to make sure the evidence is tied together cleanly before we walk into that courtroom. She looked at me. I had already opened my laptop. Over the next 3 hours, I pulled together everything I had: the time-stamped recording, my nursing documentation of my sister's injuries from the night before, the photos I'd taken in my apartment before the paramedics arrived, the bank statement screenshots, and the written timeline. I organized it into labeled folders with dates and brief annotations, the same way I'd been trained to organize incident reports. Janet reviewed each item. On the bank records, she flagged transaction after transaction: a weekend resort booking, 2 charges at a sporting goods retailer, a car payment on a truck that my sister confirmed was registered to Derek, all paid from an account funded by a child's disability benefits. This is not ambiguous, Janet said. That's the good news. The bad news is that your mother's name is on this account, which means she either knew or should have known. She knew, my sister said flatly. Then she may be facing exposure as well. Janet looked at her over the top of her reading glasses. I want you to be prepared for that. My sister nodded slowly. I'm prepared. Derek came to my apartment that afternoon. I was home briefly to change clothes, and I heard the knock while I was in the bedroom. I looked through the peephole before I opened the door. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt and a calm expression, the kind of calm that takes effort. I recognized that effort. I had seen it on the faces of people in my ER who were trying to look like they hadn't just done something they couldn't take back. I opened the door but didn't step back. My shoulder blocked the frame. I want to talk, he said. I have nothing to say to you outside of a courtroom. He shifted his weight. Callie has problems, Rachel. You know that. You've seen it over the years. I've been patient with her, but she's not stable, and Lily needs stability. I'm not trying to hurt anyone here. I'm trying to do right by my daughter. She's not your daughter, I said, and you're going to want to stop talking. I tilted my phone so he could see the screen. The recording app was open and running. His expression changed, not dramatically a flicker, quickly suppressed. You're making a mistake. You said that already, I told him. Last night. I have that one too. He stood there for another moment, jaw tight. Then he turned and walked back toward the stairwell without another word. I watched him go, then closed and locked the door, and sent the new recording to cloud backup, Janet's email, and Priya's phone. The text from my mother came an hour later. I know you think you're helping, but you are tearing this family apart. Derek is not a perfect man, but he has been there for Callie and that child in ways you have never seen. You are going to destroy all of us over a misunderstanding, and I will never forgive you for it. I saved it with a timestamp and added it to the file. Janet called that evening to tell me the protective order had been granted and the emergency custody hearing was set for Friday morning. She also told me that a neighbor of my mother's, a woman named Mrs. Orton, who had lived 2 houses down for 11 years, had contacted her office after seeing the court filing in the local records search. She wants to testify, Janet said. She's seen things. Says she's been waiting for someone to ask. What kind of things? She watched your mother hand cash to Derek on at least a dozen occasions. Watched them go through what she describes as a bank envelope together on the mother's front porch. She wrote it down, dates and descriptions, in a diary she keeps. Her words were, and I'm quoting here, I kept thinking someone official would eventually ask me. I let out a slow breath. When can she come in? She's already here. I'm looking at her diary right now. The courtroom on Friday morning was smaller than I expected. Derek's attorney was polished and loud. He opened with the same narrative Derek had been running. My sister was unstable, impulsive, a flight risk, incapable of managing Lily's medical needs. He used the word abandoned 3 times in 4 minutes. Janet didn't flinch. When it was her turn, she laid the medical records on the table first. 2 cracked ribs. Hairline wrist fracture. Lacerations consistent with blunt force. She handed the photos to the bailiff. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and an expression that gave nothing away, reviewed them without comment. Then Janet submitted the bank records with the annotated transactions. She walked through each one with the care of someone who had done this many times and knew exactly how much detail a judge needed to see and how much was too much. Your Honor, she said, Lily receives SSI benefits due to her cerebral palsy diagnosis. These funds are intended exclusively for the child's care, adaptive equipment, medical co-pays, therapeutic services. What we see here is not household expense management. This is systematic misuse of a disabled child's benefits. Derek's attorney objected to characterization. Janet responded by reading 3 specific transactions aloud, with amounts and merchant categories, and asked the attorney to explain which of them qualified as a medical or therapeutic expense. He did not. Then Janet said, We'd like to call Mrs. Eleanor Orton. Mrs. Orton was a small woman in her late 60s who walked to the stand with her purse on her arm and a small leather-bound diary in her hand. She'd been a middle school librarian for 30 years. She spoke with the calm precision of someone who had spent decades explaining complicated things to people who needed to understand them. She described, date by date, what she had witnessed from her front window and her porch. She had seen my mother count out cash from a bank envelope and pass it to Derek. She had seen Derek's truck parked in my mother's driveway on the 3rd of each month, the day Lily's SSI deposited. She had once overheard a conversation through an open window in which my mother told Derek, Don't worry, she'll never figure out the account. The courtroom was very quiet. Derek's attorney attempted to discredit her on cross. She opened her diary and read from it without being asked. Specific dates, specific amounts she had estimated, specific phrases she had written down verbatim within hours of hearing them. The diary entries were dated, consistent, and detailed in the way that only a librarian's notes could be. When she stepped down, Derek leaned over to his attorney. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw the attorney shake his head. The judge asked Derek if he wished to respond to the financial evidence. He said he had managed household finances in good faith. He said any money moved through the account was for shared expenses. He said his mother-in-law had been trying to help the family, not harm anyone. Janet stood. Your Honor, in Mr. Kendrick's sworn petition filed Monday, he stated that he alone managed all household finances and that my client had no involvement in financial decisions. He has now testified that his mother-in-law managed portions of the account. These statements are contradictory, and he cannot have it both ways. The judge made a note. She did not look up when she made it. My sister testified last. She stood at the microphone and did not look at Derek, not once. She spoke in a measured voice that I recognized as the voice she used when she was holding herself very still on the inside. She described the first time she'd asked about Lily's money and what happened. She described the second time. She described the night she'd left, what had been said, what had been done, what Lily had seen. She described arriving at my door at 3 a.m. with a split lip and a fracture she didn't know yet was a fracture, and not knowing if I would answer. I left, she said, because my daughter watched her stepfather hurt me, and I was not going to let that be her normal. That's not abandonment. That's the only responsible thing I could have done. When she stepped down, the room was silent long enough that I could hear the heating system kick on. The judge folded her hands. Temporary custody of Lily Deanne Harmon is granted to her mother, effective immediately. Mr. Kendrick, you are to have no unsupervised contact with the child pending further review. Any and all benefit funds associated with the child are to be redirected to an account in the mother's name alone, to be established within 72 hours. The financial records submitted today are referred to the Social Security Administration's Office of Inspector General for review of potential benefit misuse. She looked at the bench in front of her for a moment. I want to be very clear, she said. This court does not take lightly the misuse of benefits designated for a disabled child. Anyone who had access to those funds and directed their use away from the child's care will answer for it. She did not look at Derek. She did not look at the empty chair where my mother's name had been mentioned 17 times during the proceedings. She didn't need to. In the hallway afterward, my sister stood with her back against the wall and her eyes closed for a moment, just breathing. Lily was in the waiting area with Priya, who had come to watch. Janet was on the phone before we'd even cleared the courtroom doors. The OIG referral means SSA will open a formal investigation, Janet told me when she hung up. Your mother is a co-signer. She can't claim she didn't know what the account was for. That's going to follow her. Good, I said. My sister opened her eyes. What happens now? Now we go see Lily, I said, and then we figure out the next thing, one piece at a time. She nodded. Then she said, she really texted you that night and told you to leave me outside. She did. My sister looked at the floor for a moment. I think some part of me kept hoping she didn't really mean it. That it was just, I don't know. Knee-jerk. Protecting him because she didn't want to deal with it. Maybe it started that way, I said carefully. She was quiet. But she was in the account. Yeah. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't need to. We walked back to the waiting area. When Lily saw us come through the door, she dropped her rabbit on the chair and held both arms up, the way she'd done since she was a toddler when she wanted to be lifted. My sister crossed the room and gathered her up, careful of her own ribs, Lily's arms around her neck, both of them holding on. The SSA investigation took 6 weeks to reach a formal finding. Derek was referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office. My mother received a notice of investigation as a co-account holder, and Janet confirmed that the potential exposure was significant federal misuse of disability benefits, conspiracy to commit same. She called me when she got the notice. She didn't apologize. She said she had only been trying to help keep the family together and that I had taken something that could have been handled privately and made it ugly. I thought about Lily's chair in the hallway of my apartment, the stuffed rabbit with the flattened ear. I told my mother I had to go, and I hung up. 3 months after that night, my sister moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood with a ramp at the entrance and a small yard. Lily's new power wheelchair arrived on a Tuesday, funded by the reinstated SSI benefits now managed entirely by my sister. Lily spent 45 minutes driving it in slow circles around the living room, narrating the whole thing to the rabbit. I came over for dinner on a Saturday evening in early fall. The apartment smelled like garlic bread and the windows were open. Lily showed me her room books on low shelves she could reach from the chair, a corkboard on the wall covered in drawings, a little plant on the windowsill she was learning to water herself. I named it, she announced. What did you name it? She thought about it with great seriousness. Gerald. Gerald is a great name for a plant. She nodded, satisfied. At dinner, my sister poured 2 glasses of wine and sat down across from me, and for a while we just ate. And it was quiet in a way that felt different from all the other quiet, the held breath kind. This was just quiet, the windows letting in a little evening air. Lily telling us at length about something that had happened at school involving a substitute teacher and a classroom hamster. Afterward, washing dishes together while Lily watched a movie in the next room, my sister said, "I've been sleeping through the night." "Yeah?" For the first time in about 2 years, she handed me a bowl to dry. I didn't realize how much of my energy was going into just waiting, being ready for the next thing. "It takes a while to stop," I said. "Your nervous system doesn't just believe it's over because a judge said so. It takes time." She was quiet for a moment, her hands in the soapy water. "Do you think she'll get charged?" I knew who she meant. "I don't know, maybe. The investigation is still open." She nodded slowly. "I'm not hoping for it." "No? I'm hoping she has to sit with it," she said. "What she knew. What she did with what she knew. I don't need a courtroom for that. I just need her to know that I know." She paused. "Does that make sense?" "It does," I said. We finished the dishes. In the living room, Lily had fallen asleep against the armrest of the couch, the rabbit tucked under her chin again, the movie still going softly. My sister stood in the doorway looking at her for a long moment with the kind of expression that doesn't have a name. I drove home later with the windows down, the fall air cool and smelling like leaves. I thought about the night 3 months ago, the frantic knocking, my sister's face in the hallway light, a small girl in a wheelchair holding on to a stuffed animal like it was the last solid thing in the world. People talk about justice like it's a single moment, the gavel, the verdict, the number on a court document, but that's not really what it is. It's the plant on the windowsill with the ridiculous name. It's the power wheelchair making slow circles in a living room. It's sleeping through the night. I'd gone into that emergency room 4 years ago because I wanted to help people in the worst moments of their lives, and I'd learned pretty quickly that the help that lasts isn't the dramatic kind. It's showing up, documenting everything, staying when it gets complicated, knowing the difference between what you can prove and what you still need to find. My sister didn't need me to be a hero that night. She needed me to open the door. That part, at least, I got right.